Hi, let's talk about consumer and producer surplus. If we're talking about consumer and producer surplus in a monopoly, we are looking at something a little bit different than your standard consumer and producer surplus. So if here's our demand curve, and here we have a marginal revenue curve. So let me draw those and label them. Demand curve, of course, is the market demand, which a monopolist is held to. Marginal revenue is the amount that you make off of each group. It's decreasing because monopolists are charging the maximum amount they can, and so in order to sell more, they have to follow this demand curve for pricing and lower their cost for every single good that they sold. And when they do that, they cut into their marginal revenue. If you're having trouble with that, you need to refer to the graphs in our earlier packet from the Morton book. Now, consumer surplus, I'm just going to draw a little sketch over here. As you'll recall, consumer surplus is the area above equilibrium price. So if we have equilibrium price, consumer surplus is this area right in here that represents all the consumers above equilibrium that would have been happy with a price higher than what they paid. So these are happy consumers that felt like they gained a savings in the market. Producer surplus is the price below the equilibrium here in a market that would have been happy to sell the good for less than what the market price is. So these are producers who felt like they made a little extra money in their dealing in the market because they have a producer surplus. So for a monopoly, consumer and producer surplus is based on not simply on supply and demand, but you're actually going to look at your marginal cost curve. And the reason for that is the marginal cost curve defines what's supplied in a monopoly. Monopolists, like perfect competitors, follow that old economic rule that MC equals MR. But to find their price, they look up to where MC crosses the demand line. So here, to find quantity, they look where MC equals MR. And that's a guideline, so I'm going to make it dotted. But to find price, they're going to look up to the demand curve because they want to charge the highest possible price with no inefficiency, at least for the market. And that's a profit maximizing point. So this point right here maximizes profit for your monopoly. That does not mean that it is the most efficient point in this situation. So this point right here is profit maximizing, but it is not maximally efficient. If we look here, we found our market price of approximately $17. And with that market price, you can look above and see consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the price at which the consumers feel they have gotten a great deal. And so here's consumer surplus for our monopoly, and that's bounded at the bottom by our price line, which you can see. If I turn it back to black, you can see it. So this is our consumer surplus, and you can see here all of these consumers are happy with the price that they paid and even feel that they got a savings because they were willing to pay more. Producer surplus is bounded by MC, which is a supply line for a monopoly. And if you think of it as a supply line, it's easier to remember. And the market price. So producer surplus is the area here between MC and market price that producer surplus is the area here between MC and market price that represents how much producers were willing to sell for that's below market price. So these are the producers that feel that they got a really good deal because they were willing to sell for below market price, but fortunately for them, they didn't have to. Producer surplus is clearly pretty hard to draw in this program, so bear with me just a moment. So this right here is my producer surplus. And these are happy producers because they would have sold for less, but they didn't have to. Of course, because this is a monopoly, the monopoly has all of this producer surplus, but it's a single producer, and this represents his happiness. Well, as you recall, to maximize market efficiency, you want to maximize consumer and producer surplus. And we have a little nub over here, that is not covered, and that little nub is between what's our monopoly supply curve, the most monopolies willing to supply, and our demand curve. A monopoly supply curve, if you were going to produce the socially efficient amount, you would produce right here where MC equals demand. And that's true as well for a perfectly competitive firm. Fortunately for perfect competition, demand also equals marginal revenue, so you don't have any deadweight loss. So this socially efficient point here is the point at which the monopoly wishes to be producing, but of course cannot produce or chooses not to produce because they aren't interested in being socially efficient. They're interested in being profit maximizing. If this monopoly produced here, you would have this much more consumer surplus, this much more producer surplus. You would maximize your efficiency in the market. But because this isn't produced, your efficiency isn't maximized, and you therefore have this area right here that is a dead weight loss. And that dead weight loss is loss of efficiency in the market. I'm just going to label that DWL. So, deadweight loss in a market is the area at which a monopoly, there we go, break it free and try to slide it in that box there. But the deadweight loss is the purple. I trust you remember that. If all else fails, I'll move that line. Deadweight loss is the area bounded by marginal cost, market price, and the demand curve. And that's the loss of efficiency in a market that you experience when you have a monopoly. If we became more competitive, the monopoly's marginal revenue curve would move towards demand. You close that gap and your deadweight loss would disappear, as it does as you move from monopoly to perfect competition. Unfortunately, this market is not purely competitive and deadweight loss exists.